Here we go. Today is Sunday, April 5th, 2020, and this is episode 249. Just 7 episodes away from the magical 256, by the way, of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Good evening, Jerry, on day number 738 of my quarantine.
It does feel like it has been forever, doesn't it?
I hope you and all of our listeners are doing well and staying sane and safe and healthy.
We're doing okay. We had a bit of a scare over here. It turned out not to be COVID, but which was fortunate. But this is scary times. So absolutely take care of yourselves, and my hat's off to everybody who is first responder / ER person, hospital worker / grocery store employee. Indeed.
I was also thinking all those people who are dressed as techno goths with their hardcore face masks. Look how ahead of the times they were.
That is true. My son is in the process of 3D printing masks for a local doctor, which is pretty interesting.
Wow.
Sign of the times.
It is. It is also interesting to me how regulations suddenly vanish when there's an emergency.
Yeah, well, basically it's you can have the mask or not.
Right.
Which one do you want?
But it hasn't gone through FDA testing and approval.
Which one do you want?
But it needs 2 years of blind testing. Clinical study. I
don't know if you've seen it, but I'm also fascinated by the ventilators. That for those of you listening in 100 years, right, and don't have the context, where there's a dramatic shortage on ventilators, which I'm sure in 100 years will sound really barbaric, but they're using those the manual bags that you primarily use in like a ambulance. With a windshield wiper motor to compress it, which again definitely not FDA certified, right? But again, if
necessity is the mother of invention.
If the person's going to die, otherwise, I don't know what other choice you have. So
I do find it cute that you think somebody's going to be listening in 100 years. I don't think anybody's going to listen to us in 3 days. So
I don't know.
Not because they're dead, just because nobody listens to us.
True. That's true. Well, that's true.
Yeah. But anyway, as I often say on Twitter, I have no expertise whatsoever in these matters, so I try not to opine on them.
Yeah. So all I can say is, number 1, stay home. Number 2, wash your hands. Number 3, when you go outside, wear a mask. It's actually pretty frustrating that most of the rest of the world figured that part out, that so long before we here in the U.S. decided to embrace it. And I don't think that's uniquely us, right?
I think, how do I say this without getting into politics?
It's not uniquely a U.S. problem, right? Most of Europe had the same issue.
I think that, I don't know. Let me put it this way. I don't know. I'll say that again. I don't know for sure. But I have read some compelling arguments that was done specifically to ensure that the frontline medical workers got enough masks first.
Yeah, I think that, well, in a way, I think that certainly is likely true, because as we see now, and again for the people in 100 years, right, drastic crisis levels of shortage of masks right now. But there could have been a better way, right? And I think part of the reason that there's a current shortage right now is because we didn't take enough earlier precautions, and so now we have this this balloon of infections, which could possibly have been mitigated. But all this stuff is easy to talk about in hindsight, and
right.
But who knows?
And I think that I think you're dealing with much like we deal with IT security, which is highly complex and nuanced. You're dealing with very complex medical issues that I don't think the average person in general is equipped to fully grasp and fully internalize. And we also live in a culture that only responds to bumper sticker level messaging. So
it's true. It has to fit in a 20-second soundbite, right?
Right. We're not good at nuanced messaging, saying it or consuming it on this topic. So I don't know. I try really hard not to talk about something I don't have a good knowledge base in, and I try to let the experts, because it's amazing to me how many people who were constitutional scholars just a few months ago are now epidemiologists on Twitter. It's amazing to me.
It is fair, but they're also still constitutional scholars.
Right, because now we got another set of constitutional issues that have come up in terms of some of the laws or reactions taken by federal, state, and local government, which, again, I don't get political publicly, so I'm not going to comment on. But this is not what our show's about, but it's anyway what is on everybody's mind, right?
Absolutely. Be well. Write down the lessons you've learned from your pandemic response.
Right, because that actually does bring up an important point. Be careful of that, because if we shift all of our planning to the next pandemic, and we don't have another pandemic for 100 years, are you fighting the last war?
No, but I think there's lessons that are to be learned here, even if it's not planning for an all-out pandemic. I think we're.
But I think people can over-rotate into assuming the same.
Oh, and we will. I mean, make no mistake.
Yeah.
Make no mistake, right? We, as businesses, as governments, as societies, are going to. We're going to swing too far in the favor of planning for the next pandemic, which, as we've seen, is maybe to some level it would be prudent to be a little more prepared than we were. Maybe.
Absolutely. I will just say, I hope that individuals take their own preparedness more seriously.
Yeah.
And make sure that they could take care of themselves, their family, their friends and neighbors more effectively without having to wait or rely on the government. That's all I'll say. But the only reason I caution against not over-rotating is, again, we all have finite resources and time. So if you're over-rotating on one problem, that means you're neglecting another.
Yeah.
And we still have to, as risk managers, understand what's the likelihood.
Correct. But I mean, look, anytime stuff happens like this, and I've seen it over and over and over and over again throughout my career, this will become the fixation, right? Everything is going to become about how do we improve our response capability, our ability to handle a pandemic. It's just inevitably going to be there. I think the thing that we have to figure out is how do we take a step back and make sure that we don't become to your point, become too myopic, and maybe there's an opportunity for us to make the thing we're going to go and be prepared for a little more abstract, so it handles different types of situations which are more likely to happen, rather than necessarily another global pandemic like we have right now. So,
but anyway,
yeah.
Hey, by the way, thoughts and opinions do not in any way reflect that of our employers. Just us.
That is certainly true.
And our pets.
That's certainly true. But I do expect that everybody, including our employers, probably want you all to be safe and be well. So,
I mean, unless you're important to the economy.
God, you always got to go for the butt, don't you? Anyway. Just leave that. Just leave it. Just leave it. Just leave it.
Okay. Just
right.
this one time at work.
So our first story for today comes from a new place. I don't think we've ever had a story from Tom's Guide. And the title is Zoom Privacy and Security Issues. Here's everything that's wrong. This is not necessarily the kind of thing we normally talk about, but holy cow, this has been just everywhere in the media lately. And apropos to the discussion we've been having about pandemic, like everybody and their cat is now needing to do, web conferences. And Zoom apparently is pretty popular, or has become.
Well, it has suddenly become very popular.
It's become a very
and
popular platform.
It's also become like that lady in the movie Airplane that's freaking out, and there's a whole line of people wanting to beat the crap out of her.
That's right. I forgot about that scene. Yes, everybody stops and shakes her. Yes.
Well, then there's a line of somebody with a bat and a crowbar and a gun and a. Anyway, if you haven't seen it, you have no idea what I'm talking about. It's funny. It is
in a
for us Gen Xers.
Morbid kind of way. Yes. Anyway,
but yeah.
So they are absolutely the whipping post for the privacy and security community right now. And you found this article. This is a pretty good summary of I guess about a dozen different issues that they're facing right now. And it's kind of all over the map. One of the most prominent problems they've been having is this Zoom bombing issue where, basically there's really very little in the way of authentication. And so we have, with the rapid transformation from kind of in-place learning and working and whatnot to online, many organizations and people haven't really had a chance to adapt. And so they've had to just kind of figure stuff out really, really fast. And in doing so, they do some things maybe that aren't the best from a security and privacy perspective, like, let's say, posting the Zoom link for their class or their community, their community meeting or their European Parliament or British Parliament meeting, whatever. And so now there's this, there's hordes of people online that are organizing themselves to do these, apparently what are called Zoom raids, where they, everybody joins, many people join a Zoom session in progress, and they swear and curse and, show pornography and whatnot. And the FBI is now issued warnings about it, and there is threatening people who take part in it that they're going to be prosecuted, and just a mess. And and then that's kind of among the most pedestrian of the issues. There's others like a password stealing bug. There's a malware injection bug. There's issues with iOS profile sharing. There's some end-to-end encryption misrepresentation, I think is the way I would say the issue. There's a lot of, by the way, right now, like even as of today, there's a lot of people really consternating over Zoom's encryption, and apparently Zoom, their take is, well, it's working the way we intended it to. We're not actually going to fix it. We just we were overzealous in the way we described things.
Marketers got to market, man.
They do. Then there's a big flap about the Zoom software on Macs and how it actually intentionally bypasses some Mac security features, which is not the way it's supposed to be. And then malware authors have figured out that they can actually use the Zoom installer to install itself, bypassing the same Mac security settings. Apparently, another awesome feature is that Zoom will be very helpful, by the way, in trying to organize profiles of people in the same organization into like a directory, and it does that based on your domain name. And so, like, if I work, so defensive, you and I were on Zoom, and we had defensivesecurity.org email addresses, we would see each other. But what happens if you're on you register with a Gmail address? Well, suddenly your contact list has all the the apparently Gmail people using Gmail email addresses with their profile pictures and whatnot, and they're sharing data with advertisers and whatnot. Now, but here's the thing, right? Aside from those, like the malware security issues, which I think they've already fixed, the platform is actually pretty good. And down at towards the bottom, they kind of net it out and they say should we stop using Zoom? And their point was no, it's not a bad platform. You shouldn't be discussing corporate secrets, but if you're like holding a second grade class or your community, homeowners association meeting or whatever, it's not. The price is not bad and it works pretty well.
Yeah. So many thoughts come to mind on this. Although I'll also add, I was just reading New York City schools just banned it,
really?
Which I think is an overreaction. So I will say I'm not apologizing for Zoom, but I am disappointed in the actions of the security community on this one. I feel that it's not that these concerns aren't valid and warranted, but everybody kind of dogpiled on this company because they became suddenly very popular because they're easy to use, they're free for up to 100 people, and the usability was just there. It's easy to set up, easy to use. Everybody
it's pretty reliable.
Yeah, and non-technical people had a good time, easy time getting it going. And this company went from I think they had 1.1 million active users, and now they're up over 100 million or something, like in a span of 2 months. So first of all, kudos for them to being able to scale like that, which is pretty impressive. But we suddenly had a whole bunch of information security researchers and whatnot jump all over this platform because it suddenly got very popular. And I think probably irresponsibly freaked everybody out. It's not that these concerns aren't something we need to care about. It's not something that these concerns don't need to be fixed. But I've heard from a lot of non-technical friends who aren't in our industry, and they're like, I don't know what to do. Should I not use Zoom? Is it gonna kill my cat? And I don't think that's warranted. I think, this is a great example of in a weird circumstance or in a tough situation, usability, people found a solution, and then security showed up and spit all over it, and we look like the guys who aren't trying, or gals or whomever, are not trying to help but to hurt. And
it felt like we came in and said, well, don't use Zoom, use this other thing, right?
Well, not even that. Not a lot of people even had valid alternatives to offer people. They just bitched and moaned about
exactly. That's what I mean,
Zoom.
Right?
Yeah,
right.
And so, I'm not saying that these aren't valid concerns. What I'm saying is that the way that this was handled, and this is the mob mentality, and it's not like we want a centralized control point, but I think we didn't do ourselves a lot of favors here. We took a company that was offering a product that worked for a lot of people, and we assumed a threat profile. Or a risk tolerance, and then went and found things that were valid and things that were edge cases and things that were, miscommunications or outright maybe fabrications in terms of end-to-end encryption. But we just piled all over this company, and I think we caused a lot of confusion. Now, at the end of the day, it's going to be a very secure platform, and these guys are getting the benefit of a whole lot of free, security audits. But I think we as an industry look pretty haughty and righteous in, pissing all over something that's making a lot of people's lives easier. I let me also preface the next thing I'm going to say with there's more to my comment. So we've had this debate throughout the industry for years and years and years and years of how do you handle exploits and bugs and that sort of thing. And, the term responsible disclosure gets thrown around. I hate that term as much as I hate the term common sense legislation, because it comes loaded with emotion, and it says, if you're not doing responsible disclosure, you must be being irresponsible. Or if you don't agree with this common sense legislation, you just don't have common sense. That's not true, and that's not fair, because a lot of reasonable people have very well-reasoned counter arguments that have nothing to do with common sense or responsibility. So those sort of emotionally laden terms, I think, are disingenuous to the conversation. But it is a well-known term that we talk about giving a vendor the opportunity to fix something before we go public with it. I don't know. In this case, we had a whole bunch of people use it. A lot of people probably who found these bugs felt that they owed it to those people to warn them right away, where extraordinary circumstances. But I think we as an industry, and we're, it's a bad term because really we're a whole bunch of subcultures all grouped together under the concept of information security, really just sort of fumbled this one, and I think we confused a lot of people and maybe didn't do ourselves much favor. Sorry, rant done.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I'm a little torn on this one because at the end of the day, I think a lot of people in the security community and privacy community are trying to minimize the harm to people, right? That's their mission. That's why they're in this field, and they perceive that use of this software or in service it will conceivably or will definitely lead to harm. And I think part of the issue is the definitions of harm vary greatly across the world right now, especially in terms of privacy. And so I think while, for instance, we can all agree that the ability to use Zoom to install malware on your computer universally is a bad thing, that's a different discussion than, let's say, sharing data with advertisers. In some parts of the world, that's viewed as just a trade-off that people are willing to accept. And in other parts of the world, it is just unconscionable. And, similarly, the leaking of email addresses and user profiles to some people is no big deal. And in other places, it is, my God, we have to burn this thing at the stake. And so it's one of those kind of no true Scotsman type things. And it does, I think, confuse people. And it's unfortunate that it happens right now, as you point out. They've had like 100 times growth. I don't know what the exact number is, but it's a huge growth because people have to carry on with their lives, and this is helping them do it. It's unfortunate that these things weren't identified, a year ago and fixed a year ago. Maybe it took something like this to drive enough focus, to get them to actually pay attention to it. But even some of these things, like the encryption thing, they just said, what, it works the way we want it to work, and we'll change the way we describe our encryption. We're not changing the way it works. In other areas, they are fixing the issues apparently with malware and with the behavior on Macs and whatnot. But this is I actually think this is becoming, like, right now, as we sit here today, I think Zoom is becoming one of the pieces of critical infrastructure in society right now, whether we like it or not. My sons, one's in college, one's in high school, they both use it, right? This is how they're learning now. By the way, I again, as an American, the whole sharing data with advertisers thing doesn't bother me as much as maybe if I were in Europe somewhere. But it's it's how they're going about their business, and there really isn't a feasible alternative for them that was immediately available to use, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So, and they had to make a decision.
These are also the same people who use Facebook, and
it's a very good point. So yeah, get on Facebook and Twitter and complain about the complain about the tracking that Zoom does, right?
Yeah. This is why I have some confliction too, because I want vulnerabilities to be found and fixed. I want, hardened infrastructure and all that kind of jazz. But I just feel like this was a whole bunch of teenagers running around going, "Look what I can break."
Yeah,
and I know that may be unfair to a lot of people, but I know this may upset some people. But I really feel that, my unscientific take on watching Twitter on this and news articles, and then watching the reaction of the non-technical community, is we didn't do them a favor.
Maybe so I guess I'm a little more even keeled on this one. I think the people who were finding these vulnerabilities were doing they were doing it for what they perceive as the right purpose, right? I don't think they were trying to be malicious, or I think they, from their perspective, I'm using my skills to try to better the world, especially right now when people are, but it's a complicated, tangled knot, and it leaves people very confused. And the only way this would have been better is if these problems hadn't existed in the first place. So,
well, that's fair. That's fair. Yep. But
all right. So
I don't know.
We kicked that one in the teeth. So the next story comes from BankInfo Security. This is another follow-up to the never-ending saga of the Equifax breach. The title is "Learn from How Others Get Breached: Equifax Edition." I think we talked about this a little bit after the charges were announced against the four People's Liberation Army in China, the officers of the PLA. There's quite a lot of information came out in those in the indictments, but even more information has come out since then. This is probably going to be one of the more analyzed breaches, because there's been a Senate hearing or Senate investigation, a House investigation. There's the government's investigated so that they could file these indictments, and a lot of this stuff is now public record, and so this is more analysis of that. And I thought it was worth talking about. There's a couple of really interesting comments, really I thought worthwhile comments to talk about in here. There's quotes from Adrian Sanabria and then from Daniel Billar in particular, that we all know, hopefully, that this was an incident back in 2017 where some people broke in, they compromised a dispute resolution portal operated by Equifax, and the actor exploited a vulnerable version of Apache Struts, which had recently been patched. It was not a 0 day. It was like a 7 day or a 14 day. I don't remember exactly.
You mean a patch was recently released? Not that Equifax had patched it.
Correct. The patch had been recently released.
Yep.
And so it wasn't unknown to the world. And in fact, the Department of, or DHS here in the U.S. had issued an alert about it, and that was received by Equifax, and they actually really apparently tried to take action on that, and did in fact try to do some network scans. But as a lot of these reports pointed out, the scanning they did not identify that Struts was running on this particular application, and so there's a couple of great quotes I thought in here. One was from Adrian Sanabria, was that these are a couple of tweets. They're all tweets, right? That they looked at the Struts vulnerability very seriously. They just failed to find it in their environment, but not for a lack of trying. They did a lot of things right. Unfortunately, it didn't come close enough to balancing out what they did wrong, or were doing wrong. And so that certainly is true. And there's a big list, and I think this comes out of a compilation of the different reports analyzing this, of issues that they got wrong, and things like they didn't have asset management, they didn't inventory their software, and it kind of goes down. They only retain their logs for 30 days. Things that look very obviously wrong, and of course they're the ill-fated SSL visibility appliance, which the certificates for that had expired years prior, and it was only, this incident, by the way, was only detected once their security team actually, or whoever managed this device, went and updated the certificates, and once they did that, then it started actually detecting the activity, and they realized that they had been compromised. But then, so Daniel Ballar goes on and has a couple of really, I think, insightful comments, and this it goes like this: there are management solutions to technical problems. There are no technical solutions to management problems, which is a great point. We, I think, tend to get enamored with technology solutions, but we don't focus so much on the process side. And so when you look at many of the failures that happen here, they really are management failures. And he goes on a little bit more and talks about brittle code. He says insecure brittle code and recurrent rich attack surfaces are solely, not 50%, not 80%, but 100% due to upper management process failures. And so that kind of, I infer what he's saying there is one of the reasons they didn't find struts in this portal was because it was a big complicated, brittle, old application, and it hadn't been updated or had been overhauled and modernized, and so the composition of it wasn't known, and they didn't know to patch it. So, but when you go back up and you look through the list of issues that were not working, they are all lack of management or management failures, right? The fact that you don't have a good asset inventory or software inventory, the fact that you didn't update those certificates on the appliance that you bought to do that function, right? These are resource allocation. These are attention to detail problems. And by the way, I'm coming to understand some of the challenges that organizations in ways that I hadn't had before, but you still have to do it, right? It is incumbent on you, incumbent on leaders, the security leadership, to make sure these things happen. It's not enough. You can't just check a box and say, well, yes, we have a SSL visibility appliance. That's not enough. You have to make sure that it actually works.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And I would kind of boil it down to a little different take, but with the same message, which is that I see a lot of organizations driven by limited resources, having typically a ticket-based culture to get things done. Well, the problem I see with that in general is that you don't have the staffing and the resources to get to really know your environment and your tools in a day-to-day care and feeding way. Mm-hmm. So, you look at something as simple as failing to update certificates or broken SSL visibility appliances. It's not that anybody went out of their way to forget that or miss that. It's that most likely everybody was stretched thin, working on a lot of different things, and they didn't have a lot of free time to explore and know their tools well. And I think it's very difficult to do this, but I think the ideal way you run a security tool set is by having subject matter engineers who have the free time to do free-form exploration of that tool and the tool's capability and get to know it so they know how it ticks and how it, breathes and lives, and will be able to detect when something is wrong, as opposed to being in a break fix, project to project environment. It's almost like, you need the chief engineer in the enterprise who knows the ship well enough. He can hear when something's off. And we don't allow that anymore with our IT folks, or our IT security folks. We have them running from project to project to fire, and they have no opportunity to be proactive. So the only way that some of the things would have gotten fixed is if there was some sort of, in general, tool or alert, again, back to a technology fix for a resource issue where the resources are not allowed to become truly subject matter experts with their tools in such a way that they detect problems before they become issues, and aren't reliant upon some sort of other piece of technology to tell them that they have a problem.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's a fair point.
But it's really tough to do. I've tried to run organizations like that, and I have failed repeatedly to be able to build that much free time into my guys' day so that they can get to know the tools well and can look at the little nooks and crannies like this and go, oh, wow, hey, yeah, look, that SSL certificate's expiring next week. I need to get some change control in, or whatever. Or, hey, I better make sure this is still working right and that this is alerting properly. How can I conceive of a test that makes sure all the components are fitting together properly? I think that there's a lot of value in having that sort of free-form time that companies just have never valued or gotten rid of.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So it is a difficult, I think, from a senior leadership perspective. What you talked about is difficult, because how do you know whether people are doing a good job or a bad job of getting familiar with their tools? I think
you could test it with red teaming. You could test it with other things similar to red teaming, like third party audits or whatever. But
right,
it is tough to quantify. You know when it's not there.
Yes,
it's tough to know when it is there.
Exactly right. And I think that's honestly that's what I think a lot of this comes down to is, and the reason for the ticket-driven culture is that we can, we can increase the utilization of our employees at the expense of what you just described. But how do we make sure that if they're not working on tickets, they're actually doing things that are productive? That's the concern, right? Fundamentally it's a trust and management issue, right? I think just doing the ticket, doing everything via ticket is the easy button, because it means you don't have to spend a whole lot of time figuring that those hard, figuring out how to answer the hard questions. You can just look at ticket metrics.
Right. Agreed.
So
and it's a shame.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, the last story for today comes from ZDNet. The title here is Microsoft: How One Emotet Infection Took Out This Organization's Entire Network. So this is it's a story from a Microsoft report from their team called DART. It's anyway, the report is half interesting and half marketing, but I thought it was interesting enough for us to talk about. The actual report itself, it's a little hard to find. I'll include a link to both the ZDNet article and the Microsoft post, because the link in the ZDNet article is broken. This is a report from the Microsoft Detection and Response team. It apparently, by the way, refers to an event that occurred to the U.S. city of Allentown, Pennsylvania, back in 2018. But they're not named by. They're not actually named. The report calls them Fabricam. That's the pseudonym they refer to the customers. So the report is called Full Operational Shutdown, and it describes the process this adversary went through to infect and effectively take down this customer's network. Before I kind of describe that, one thing I wanted to say is it's interesting. One of the most interesting things is the objective of this actor is not clear, right? So you'll understand more when I get there. So the way this started out was some advanced persistent threat actor sent an employee at the victim phishing email, and that email apparently had either it had an attachment or it downloaded an attachment that had to run in cmd.exe, and it actually required an interactive prompt, and so it was clever enough to convince the employee to follow the prompts, and that apparently led to the employee's credentials being stolen by the adversary. Over the next couple of days, the adversary used those credentials to access the employee's email inbox, and then started sending similar types of emails from this insider's email inbox to other people in the company. And so then it was kind of a lather, rinse, repeat kind of thing where they were collecting credentials and trying to continue moving around laterally. About 5 days in, they apparently had collected enough credentials and started infecting the environment with Emotet. About 3 days later, and I think that happened on a Friday, like late on a Friday, and then by Monday, everything was pretty much gummed up to hell. And they apparently all of their systems had their CPUs pegged. They said the network was completely saturated. I don't know with what. This was not as far as I can tell, a ransomware type attack. It seems all indications are, and there's really nothing that I can find about the motivation other than for it to be a denial of service attack against the organization. And apparently it was pretty effective. This victim, again, purported to be Allentown, Pennsylvania, had paid about $1 million to get their environment back up and running. So, there's really not a lot that is super novel and complex about this. But they do describe the recommendations. Microsoft does describe the recommendations, because I think this is not an anomalous path for adversaries to take. Like, we see this over and over and over again with, whether we're talking about, NotPetya or, the latest Soto no Kibi, right? It's a very similar kind of a process adversaries take, and maybe some details are a little different, like they'll come in via RDP versus phishing the employee. But once they're in, things tend to continue in a very, very common way. So one of the recommendations Microsoft made was that you should filter your internal email, and that's something that I don't think a lot of organizations do.
Filter for what exactly?
Well, for malware, but primarily for malware.
So some sort of AV scrubber on your mail server.
Yeah. Yep.
By the way, Microsoft will sell you one of those.
Well, absolutely. I mean, this whole thing is let's not kid ourselves, right? This whole thing is an advertisement for Microsoft services. So let's not kid ourselves.
This whole thing, like this entire podcast for the last 6 years? Wow.
Yeah, they're playing the long game, I guess.
Wow.
I kid. They have no affiliation whatsoever. So that's one. The second category, which is a couple unique items. Number one is multi-factor authentication, right? So if the adversary hadn't been able to phish the email credentials, this would have been a lot harder to pull off, and arguably they would have had to do it through some other way. They recommend having network visibility. By the way, I know this is an advertisement. This is clearly an advertisement for Microsoft products like Defender ATP. But I gotta tell you, like, if you have a network of any size and complexity, and you don't have a CrowdStrike or a Defender ATP or a Carbon Black or something like that, you're playing with fire. I mean, and not only have it, right, but be able to use it and monitor it well, because there are just so many ways to get in. And these tools actually do work quite well. I mean, this is an arms race, and so my opinion on that will probably change in a year when they're much less effective. But right now, they're pretty good at detecting anomalous activity. And then they also recommend using the LAPS tool, the Local Administrator Password Solution, which boggles my mind that there are people or organizations that still don't do this, because it's a common,
No, I think it's very, very common, because the sysadmins are not security guys typically, and
you're right. Yep.
I mean, and that's no knock on them at all, but there's a huge silo divide there. So really simple tools that are built into the operating system are not the purview of the security team. They're the purview of the sysadmin team. And typically it's not worth the fight for a lot of organizations for the security team to go to the sysadmin team and say, hey, can you turn this on? They'd rather go buy a third-party tool they could load to achieve that. And it's messed up and toxic, but that's what happens.
No, it's fair. I mean, but we saw this. This was most prominently a problem in NotPetya, right? That credentials were harvested out of memory, and those credentials were common across different systems on the network, and just provides an easy means. And that, by the way, is the way that Emotet propagates. It's not using a vulnerability; it's actually using legitimate credentials to propagate across network shares. And then they also recommend pretty basic stuff: configuration management, which is things like timely patch management, antivirus definitions being updated, and then finally, the one that I think the fewest people actually want to do, but probably one of the most important, is implementing best practices to segment administrative privileges. This is what they used to call Red Forest, and they now call it the directory tier administrative model. I thought Red Forest was a much cooler name, but it's a giant pain in the ass, and administrators hate it, particularly because it's inconvenient. It makes their job harder and less convenient until, of course, they are having to work for 3 weeks on end because they've been completely compromised. But yeah, this is super important, and really at the core of my deep-seated hatred of Active Directory. And as I've said in the past, it's not really Active Directory that I hate per se. It's actually how people use it. And I think this is the thing that, this is the solution to that, but few people actually want to do it because it is so problematic. Until you're willing to pay Microsoft $1 million to come in and do it for you, and then apparently it's okay. So don't be like Allentown.
Third-party consultants always get more credibility than internal folks.
Well, it's true, and like we talked about earlier, in response, it takes a crisis sometimes to change behavior. Although unlike a pandemic, I think this is going to keep happening over and over and over and over and over again. So, anyway, that's the lesson. So anything else you picked up from that?
No, I think you hit all the main ones that I had in my notes. Nothing else that really popped out.
Good deal.
I did have one other thought on Zoom, though.
Sure.
To go back to that. I promise you that a lot of companies went through third-party risk management with Zoom, and it passed with flying colors.
Oh, that's probably true, yeah.
How's that third-party management working out for you?
Well, it's all done on a spreadsheet, so it's...
I'm just saying.
Encryption, check.
I know, I'm being snarky. I know, I see these absurd processes that we bow down to in the InfoSec world that I think are kind of, but then somebody says, okay, what are you going to do instead? Then I start to have trouble to answer that question. So I'm being what I rally against, which is a complaining without a solution.
In the context of an organization, I'll tell you, I would not use Zoom. Right, I wouldn't use Zoom to
there goes our sponsorship with Zoom
to discuss confidential information, of any particular consequence. But I wouldn't have any reservations, assuming they have these, the malware issues fixed. I wouldn't have any reservations about using it to take an online class or something. I personally, right?
Catch up with family, or
yeah, exactly.
Have an online drinking happy hour.
Right. I wouldn't have any. But again, I'm not in Europe, and my context on privacy is different than other people, and so we can't assume that everybody values the same things in the same way. So,
well, that's very enlightened of you.
Yeah. Anyway, that's the show for today. I do want to just reiterate that I hope everybody stays well. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your families. Wash your hands. Be smart when you go out. Stay home if you can until this blows over. Be aware that it's not going to be over fast, right? We're going to be here for a little while. We're gonna peak. We're going to be going down, and there's going to be lots of exuberance because we've all got cabin fever. By the way, it was interesting. I saw Andrew Cuomo's daily briefing today, and he spent about half of his time talking about how to deal with cabin fever. I thought that was pretty funny.
Didn't he also, and correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't he say they're like in desperate need of COBOL programmers?
I don't think it was New York. I think that was New Jersey. But yes, yes.
Somebody was like, they desperately need COBOL programmers right now.
Yeah. So if any of our listeners here are COBOL programmers, I'm pretty sure it was the governor of New Jersey tweeted out a desperate plea for COBOL programmers. I don't know why, but I bet you it has to do with the recent aid package that the government passed, where they have to print checks by the millions. And that was delegated down to the states. So I suspect that's what that's all about. But yeah, COBOL is. I took a COBOL class a long time ago, and it's like programming language meets essay writing is how I would describe it.
I'm going to let that go. All right, carry on.
It's been a long time, and I'm getting old. So anyhow, that's the show for today. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves, and we'll talk again soon.
Hey, you can follow me, Andrew Cowett, on Twitter at Lerg, L-E-R-G, and Jerry at Malicious Link. He still has far more followers than me, and I beat myself up every night over that. So
he cries. He does cry himself to sleep. So you should actually follow him. And
I've even bought like thousands and thousands of followers. They're all Russian bots, but still, you're ahead of me.
I mean, you got to try, right? I don't know why people follow me. By the way,
me either.
It's got to be the whole llama thing. There's no other explanation. I'm totally uninteresting otherwise.
You think llamas make you interesting? Really?
Totally. Absolutely.
Oh,
Did you see that? Have you seen the little AVI that llama is pretty suave, man.
Yes, a llama is.
And by the way, llamas are in right now. They are in.
What, like as a survival food? What do you mean?
There's llama cakes. There are llama Cheerios. There's llama everything right now.
Llama flavored?
Well, I don't think they're really llama flavored, but because that would be most unfortunate for llamas.
Do you see what this pandemic has done to us?
Right. Maybe we should go.
We should.
All right.
Thanks, everybody. And by the way, Patreon donors, you guys are awesome. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Especially in times like these. It's always humbled and amazed me that folks are so kind to donate to us. But it helps us keep the show unsponsored and no ads and nobody telling us what we can say and not say. So we like it that way. If you are so inclined and have the means, we're always happy to have new folks supporting us.
Absolutely. We've unfortunately, because of the times, we've lost a lot of that, and maybe because the content has decreased in quality or something. I don't know. We have lost a fair number of sponsors over the past couple of weeks, or not sponsors, but Patreon donors. And I attribute that, by the way, to the impending 30% unemployment rate. So,
that, and I was sick most of last year, and the show kind of suffered. And
fair.
No, and by the way, I completely understood, and no issue with those folks who had to withdraw their support. We completely understand it, and respect that.
Absolutely. All right, have a good one, everyone. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.